Hello and welcome to this video which describes the features of the Shrimp Terminology Browser. It assumes you have a basic understanding of SNOMED CT-AU and the Australian Medicines Terminology, or AMT, and you are interested in exploring the content and modelling in more detail. If you haven't already done so or would like a refresher, please check out our webinars on the National Clinical Terminology Service, or NCTS, document library. The Shrimp Terminology Browser is a free web-based browser that can be used to look through SNOMED CT and AMT content. The Australian Digital Health Agency licenses it from the CSIRO to make it available for everyone to use, and the good thing about it is that it allows people to browse the terminology without having to build their own database or implement the terminology data. And you also don't need to be a registered user within the NCTS. You can use any browser you're comfortable with, although it probably works best with Chrome or Firefox. The browser gives you descriptions of any given concept, and it also displays how the concepts are related to each other and the modeling of each concept. It is useful to use this browser when you are beginning to learn about the terminology. Maybe you are evaluating SNOMED CT-AU for its clinical content. Maybe you've been given a SNOMED code or description and you want to find out more about what that concept is. You may be requesting a concept to be added and want to see where it should be located within the hierarchies and what attributes it's likely to have. Maybe you're mapping and want to find suitable SNOMED CT descriptions or concepts for this purpose. Finally, one of the more advanced things you might want to be doing is looking at the properties of a concept for data analytics. As I said before, the CSIRO developed and owns this tool through the Australian eHealth Research Centre branch of the CSIRO. And just to note that this is one example of a SNOMED CT-AU implementation. Now you may have heard that SNOMED is within your own clinical information system or an app of some sort. How you interact with the terminology within those applications could be different to how you are interacting with it in the Shrimp browser. So just be aware that there may be slight differences in how you search or the kind of information that is displayed to you. There are a couple of ways you can access the Shrimp browser. We have a link to it from the NCTS website under the Tools section, and you can also do a Google search. Just make sure that when you're looking for Shrimp, you're also adding in CSIRO or Terminology Browser for a more specific result. So here I am in my browser, and this is Chrome, and I'm going to open a new tab and search for Shrimp browser. Now the top result looks right, so I'll click on that, and because I'm accessing it for the first time, I will go down and accept the license conditions. And here is the browser. A tour has popped up, but I'm just going to end that, and I can access it at any time from this question mark here. Now, you may want to bookmark this page for future reference. The steps may be slightly different between different browsers, but the principle is the same. So I will click on the star, and I'm happy that it's in the bookmarks bar, so I'll click on Done. But if I hover on that, I can see that the address is really long. And one trick about the bookmark is that it remembers a particular concept and terminology version, but I always want the current version whenever I access it. So what I'll do is right-click on the bookmark and click on Edit. I'll go to the URL, get to the beginning of that, and then highlight everything from Shrimp to the end and delete that. And now I can click Save. And if I hover on that again, you can see that it's a much shorter bookmark. Now let's go through each part of the user interface in turn. In the ribbon is the Terminology tab, and this is the default tab that the web page starts on. Over on the top right are drop-down filters, where you can start to narrow down the scope of your search. And just underneath is the search bar where you type in your search terms, and then below that you can see the results. In the middle is what we call the hierarchy panel or taxonomy panel, and this is where you can see the ISA relationships that associate concepts with each other. Directly underneath is the modeling view, where you can see the defining relationships of the selected concept. Over on the bottom right-hand corner is the properties box, and here you can find information about the code itself and all of its descriptions and perhaps some other pieces of information. One other place of interest is the Can't Find the Concept button, and you can click on that to submit some concepts to the NCTS for analysis and inclusion into the terminology. So let's go through the hierarchy panel first. As I already mentioned, it shows where concepts are placed in the hierarchy via ISA relationships, also known as supertype-subtype relationships. The viewer will give you the immediate parents and ancestors, but only one step down with immediate children. In SNOMED CT-AU, there are two root concepts, or concepts that do not have parents, so they are the topmost concepts. SNOMED CT concept contains core international content plus some localized Australian content. Now, if I just go back, Australian concept contains the Australian medicine's terminology. Now, the AMT was developed separately to SNOMED CT while still conforming to the SNOMED CT specifications, and this is why you can see it in its own root concept. Now, when a concept is in focus, it has a red border around it, and the properties and modeling will be shown for that selected concept. You can click on any of these boxes, and it's a good way to explore the content. So let me just go back to home and say I'm curious about lab tests. So I'll click on procedure, and because it has many children, they're grouped into these white boxes. So I'll just click on the top one, and then I'll click on laboratory procedure, and then laboratory test. And you can see it also has several children, and you can keep clicking on that and going down as far as you can. Now you can zoom in and out of the hierarchy panel using your mouse scroll wheel or the pinch and zoom of your laptop. And you can also click on the canvas on the white space and drag that around. And that's useful if you've got really long hierarchies or several children to look at. So I'll just reload the page so I get back to the default layout. Now you may be curious about the colors and what they mean, so I'll talk about that when I talk about the modeling view next. So the modeling view gives you a visual representation of the defining ISA and attribute relationships that give the concept its meaning. These follow a SNOMED CT diagramming guideline convention, and I'll go through the basic information most people would be interested in. The ISA relationships are designated by an open arrow, and these are placed at the top, with the attribute relationships below and grouped together where appropriate. A purple box means that a concept is sufficiently defined, and this means that it has a unique set of relationships that help to define it, which allows the concept to be uniquely distinguished by a machine. The blue boxes are primitive concepts, and basically this means they have definitions that can't be distinguished from other concepts within the terminology. While having purple boxes enables richer analytics, in reality, the scope of clinical terminology means that we can't include absolutely everything to help define a concept. For example, you could define a laboratory procedure as taking place within a lab, but this isn't relevant clinical information. So often a primitive concept is within a kind of supporting domain that supports the clinical terminology, and we don't have all of the information in there to sufficiently define it. The yellow boxes are the actual relationship types or attribute relationships. So in this case, it is the method. Sometimes, if there are several attribute relationships, these may be grouped together by this open circle to indicate they should be analyzed together. Again, with any of these boxes in the modeling view, you can click on the box and that becomes the concept in focus, and you can find out more information about it. So next we'll talk about the properties box. Here I've got the properties of the selected concept, evaluation, action. The top is the code. Then after that are the descriptions, and there are three different types of descriptions: the fully specified name, the preferred term, and then any synonyms, mostly acceptable synonyms. There are also other metadata, such as effective time, which you could interpret as when the concept was first placed in the terminology. There's also information about whether the concept is primitive or not, and then there's also a module ID, which basically tells you who owns and maintains the concept. So it could be either an international core concept, or the Australian Clinical Extension, or the AMT. Now, anywhere here in the properties box, you can copy and paste or drag and drop the cell into another application. For example, if you're working with the codes in Excel, you can highlight that, and you can either copy and paste or drag and drop this into another application. But do be careful if you're working in Excel because it does truncate long codes. Now, the properties box can include additional information depending on what the concept is. So for example, let me bring up an inactive concept, such as this one. And if you go down to the properties box, you can see an inactive property and it equals true. So this is only shown for inactive concepts. Now, if you remember from previous webinars, concepts do remain in the terminology, but they can be inactivated and replaced by another concept if there was a change in source data or perhaps a change in editorial rules. So a good feature of Shrimp is that if a concept is inactivated, it will show you one or many replacements if they exist, such as down here. And you can click on that and Shrimp will directly take you to that new active concept. Another property that may be displayed is an ARTG ID, which is the identifier on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. So normally these are associated with the AMT Container Trade Product Pack or CTPP concept. So let me bring up one now. And if I scroll down to the properties below, I can see that the ARTG ID is associated with a Container Trade Product Pack concept. Okay, now let's talk about searching, and the Shrimp browser has a flexible approach in searching for your terms. There are 3 drop-down filters up here, and the first one is the terminology. The default is SNOMED CT, but essentially you can select from any code systems that are within the server. The server that is in the back end of Shrimp is the public CSIRO Onto server, and you can see here it also includes human phenotype ontology as well as LOINC, but most people would be using Shrimp to browse SNOMED CT. If you have access to a local FHIR terminology server, you can also point Shrimp to it if you want to browse your own FHIR resources, and you can enter the location up here. The second type of filter is by the version. Now, the default in Shrimp is the current release of SNOMED CT-AU, but you can go back to previous releases if you wanted. The third type of drop-down is via reference set. If you recall, we produce subsets or bite-sized chunks of the terminology for use in a defined context. It is really useful to limit your search to members of a reference set if you're working within a particular domain, and I'll show you how this works in a little while. Okay, so let's start to type in some search terms. Shrimp allows partial word search, so you don't need to enter all of your terms as long as you have 3 characters. So for example, if I want to search for acute myocardial infarction, I will type in acute myo in, and the search results will come up there. Now the words can be in any order, so I will type in 500 milligram amox 20 because I am looking for the medicinal product pack of amoxicillin 500 milligram capsules 20s. Another feature that Shrimp supports is synonyms. So if you remember from the other introductory webinars, there are a few different description types, and synonyms are alternative ways of describing a concept which allows for searching. So here in this example, I will type in liver failure. And the third result is hepatic failure. So if I click on that and I look down at the acceptable synonyms, my original search term is there, liver failure, and that's why it's come up as a search result, even though the preferred term is hepatic failure. Searching also supports acronyms. So here I have HIV, and I haven't had to worry about capitalization either. An acronym can be found within a preferred term here, as in HIV organism, or it can also be a synonym. So for example, with cachexia associated with AIDS, if I look down, I can see HIV is associated with an acceptable synonym. Finally, you might have a SNOMED CT code and you want to know what that is. So I will put in a code here. And you can see that was my CTPP example from before. Now let's look more closely at the search results themselves. And I will go back to HIV. Now the preferred term is displayed, And again, the preferred term is the most common way of representing the concept in human language. Now you'll also notice that there is a semantic tag at the end of the line, which is the word in brackets on the right, and it describes the sub-hierarchy in which the concept is located. Now, the semantic tag is officially part of the fully specified name, but for practical purposes, it's been included within the preferred term in this tool so you can easily determine which search result is the one that's relevant for you. Now, the search result only returns the top 100 matches only, and you'll need to add more search terms to narrow the result down. For example, I will type in pregnancy, and now I have a more specific search. As I mentioned before, if you cannot find the concept after searching for terms, including possible variations of the term, and here I will look for zombie bite wound, there are no concepts. So I will click on this can't find the concept button, and it takes me to the request submission page on the NCTS website. And from here, you can fill in the details of the concept that you want to submit. One of the things that might trip some people up when they're first looking at the shrimp browser is that search results can appear duplicated. Now, this is because the search result shows the preferred term, and the preferred term must be unique within a hierarchy, but is not necessarily unique across different hierarchies. So if I search for hemolysis, I can see that there are 3 identical looking results here. But if I look on the right-hand side at the semantic tag, you can see there are some differences. So the first one is an observable entity, and there's also an attribute and a finding. So that's one way you can tell the difference between the search results. However, probably one of the best ways of narrowing the search result down so you don't get irrelevant results is to filter on a reference set. So here, if I filter on Clinical Finding Foundation reference set, I go from over 400 matches to only 22 matches and only one specific hemolysis result. Now, if you have filtered on a reference set, only active concepts will be returned in the search. And also in the hierarchy view, any members of that particular reference set will be displayed in green text. So here, for example, I have hemolysis, which I searched for, but also all of its children are included in the Clinical Finding Foundation reference set. Head to the NCTS website if you want to find out more information about the available reference sets. You may also have to click on each search result and look at the hierarchy panel and modeling view to really help you distinguish between the concepts. For example, let me remove this filter and search for tablet. And there are several that are within the AMT. So if I click on the first one, I can see in the hierarchy view that this is a unit of measure. The next one is a unit of use, and then the last one is a dose form, and that's the one most people are probably interested in. Now, another thing I would like to go through in more detail are inactive concepts. If you do happen to find a concept that is inactive, we don't recommend you use that for clinical use because clearly it's not relevant anymore. However, do note that if you have filtered on a particular reference set, only active concepts will be displayed in the search. But here I am in all concepts, and say you were looking up a code in shrimp, so I'll just paste one in. There are a number of ways you can tell if this is inactive or not. Firstly, the search result text is in a yellowy mustard color. Secondly, if I click on that, the concept itself is in bright yellow in the hierarchy view, and there are no parents or children associated with it. There also isn't a modeling view, so basically it's a standalone concept. Another clue is that if you look at the properties box, you can see the inactive property equals to true. Now, often there could be a reason for inactivation, so I'll scroll down and see that this one is ambiguous. And there are also 2 concepts that could be possible replacements for this. So I'll just click on the first one, and I can see it's a nasal obstruction, with a parent of nasal airway finding. And then if I go back to the last concept I was on, which is my inactive concept, I can click on the second option. And this concept is a nasal congestion, which is obviously very different to a nasal obstruction. Another special case is searching medicines and substances. If I'm looking up amoxicillin and I don't filter on any of the reference sets, I can see this term is associated with substances, AMT medicinal products and trade products, and clinical terms such as findings and procedures. So if you remember before, I said some preferred terms look duplicated, but they belong to different hierarchies and therefore have different meanings. But because of the AMT, some of the results may have the same meaning but belong to different hierarchies. With substances, for example, amoxicillin is both a substance, which comes from SNOMED International Core Content, and an AU substance, which comes from the AMT. Now, the AMT describes commonly used medicines in Australia and supports electronic medication management. As I mentioned before, it was developed independently of SNOMED CT while conforming to the specifications. Think of it like its own self-contained branch of therapeutic products and other content that help define medicines, such as substances and other qualifiers, including dose forms, container types, units of measure, and units of use. We are looking to integrate the AMT with SNOMED CT to make use of all that SNOMED has to offer. When this is completed, what will happen is that the duplicate AMT concept itself will be inactivated, and the corresponding SNOMED CT concept will be the one recommended for use. So in the meantime, how do you differentiate between SNOMED CT and the AMT within shrimp? There are a few ways to do this. The first is to look at the semantic tag, for example, AU substance instead of substance. The second way is to click on the concept and look at the code itself. And if there's a string in the middle of 10000036 or 10000168, that describes either a SNOMED CT-AU or AMT concept. Now, if the code doesn't contain these strings and is rather short, it is likely to be core international content. Finally, if you scroll all the way to the left in the hierarchy view, and this is a long one, you can see the root concept is SNOMED CT concept here. But for an AMT concept, the root concept is Australian concept. But one of the easiest ways to look at only AMT product concepts is to filter on a specific reference set. So if I will now filter on medicinal product reference set, I go from 822 results to only 2 results. And I can also filter on container trade product pack reference set, and only relevant results will be shown here. And I just quickly wanted to remind you that when you are searching for CTPPs, one of the properties is an ARTG ID, which is right down the bottom here. And you also may have more than one. So if I click on another product, you can see there are 2 ARTG IDs here. And finally, we are often asked how to navigate through the AMT products, going from, say, CTPP to MP, and I'll quickly show you that now. Staying with this amoxil example, the hierarchy view only goes up to the medicinal product pack level, and that's because the units of use concepts are associated with HAS relationships, which means you need to use the modeling view to jump across. So I find the HAS TPUU relationship, and I click on the destination here, amoxil 250 milligram capsule. And now you can see that one of the parents or ancestors is medicinal product, and in this case, it is amoxicillin. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions, you can contact us via the Help Centre. Details are on the slide here.